Hey, hello. So we've got a new restriction list that's just come out, and it's going into effect one day before the World Championships. So I'll be going there. I've already been practicing a bit for it as well. Fortunately, this doesn't adversely negatively impact me. I think they try to make it as like kind of not as impactful as possible. Obviously, you can't get it perfect, so that's just the thing to bear in mind. Now, what we've seen is that Mellow Amusements Colossus has been banned in both V Premium and Premium. This is the second Gear Chrono card that got banned this year. There hasn't been Gear Chrono restrictions in years before this point, which is kind of crazy. No, sorry, not even this year, only in this season. So that's mad. But then we've also got Narukami, Stunverse being limited to one. So just go through this quickly. V Premium, I don't think a lot of people don't feel like this is enough. At least the people who have been testing at a high level the whole Steam Maiden matchup, because people do feel like it's more to the Cat and Intrana, if anything, that is causing more problems for them in games. Whereas Colossus just feels like you just kind of pop off and you just kind of auto win out of the blue, but I feel like it's more the advantage gain and the scaling as well. Like the cats get stronger and stronger, and when you have multiple cats, you're creating numbers that are very high anyway, and you're multi-tacking a lot as well. So I think that is kind of the big thing, while reusing force markers to gain power, so that damage triggers don't do anything, is kind of the idea. So it's not a very popular restriction choice. I mean, yes, it tones down Steam Maidens, but I don't think it'll stop it from being overplayed. Now into Premium, I think these restrictions are more effective in that I think Mellow Amusements Colossus being banned in Premium, obviously bans are never ideal. I think it's probably one of those cards people will miss less. It's a single rare, and doesn't really fit in with any sort of theme anyway, because it's just kind of a random card. It's not like it belongs in, you know, like the Revelation Amaruda deck or something, right, or some sort of deck from an anime. So I think it's one of those cards people will miss less, probably in some way. But the thing is that this card is able to kind of go off from main phase or even mid battle. There's a lot of ways to bring him out, because Time Leap is a very strong mechanic. It always has been. That's why in G era Time Leap was dominating for a while, because the thing with Time Leap is you're basically toolboxing, and by being able to search for anything you want, you're basically accessing any effect you want. So as long as you're printing cards that are just good in general, doesn't matter as long as they're called from the deck. Like, it's probably why having Gear Chrono cards that have the effect saying when placed from hand probably will be a significant nerf to the clan as well. But that's why TikTok and Melon will always be good cards. Now, the thing is with Colossus is that oftentimes you will have it before you reach the guard step of Shlishma, which is dangerous because obviously you get a lot more attacks after Shlishma. And Shlishma also flips Shlishma so that you can use Shlishma's G-Zone skill to then call over one of your grade 3s. So as long as you have grade 3s that have ended their battle, you can then call again. If you have a way somehow of calling over your Shlishma rearguard, you can then put Shlishma back in your G-Zone face up and then call again over another grade 3 attacker. You know, it's just one of the kind of combo plays. There's a lot of aggressive lines of plays you can do, depending on what you end up with. So it's got a bunch of ways to kill the opponent, basically, or pressure the opponent. And the thing is the reason why it's effective with Shlishma is that if you're calling Colossus before that guard step, Shlishma will gain 10k power, not just the rear guards, but also the stride itself. So then what happens here is that when you're perfect guarding, you have to drop an extra card because the Colossus is now in play. Because usually that's when they get it by at the latest, most of the time. So that's kind of the awkward situation you're kind of having to deal with, and that does actually beat down your hand a bit. But then also the attacks after that. But then if you're trying to play around it, you have to guard early, which can be less ideal in some cases. You have less flexibility in guarding. You can misplay. That can also lead to like basically shooting yourself in the foot. There's a lot of things that can go wrong because of Colossus, basically. And that can cause just enough of a card economy difference to the player that their next turn will be lacking. Now, That on its own isn't really the biggest deal. The reason why Colossus is even more effective, specifically in Steam Maiden of all decks in the game right now, is because Steam Maidens have Intrana and they have the cat, obviously. And those are the best Grade 2 gaming cards you could possibly get. And obviously, unlike V format, Grade 2 gaming is more of a thing in Premium. And so when you're plussing 3 every time, well, there's a lot of implications here. Intrana on play CB1, you call the cat. Okay, that's like the average V series card, CB1 to +1. But then it gets more free because the cat's on play's ability, you check top 3, you add 1 Steam Maiden to your hand. So you're basically doing a filter search 3 and you're adding 1. There is no discard cost. So you know those grade 3 searches we have? Or the Eradicator searcher that they've got, the one that's grade 1 on plays, check top 5, add 1 to hand, discard 1. No discard cost for that. So you're basically now also gluing an 8k cat that gains power for every card in your bind zone. So as the game goes on, early game it won't scale as quickly, but when you get to mid game, you'll get a lot stronger because you bind more by then, usually. So the thing that would happen is that you get that plus, but we're not done yet. So you got the +1 cat, you got the +1 for placing the cat, so it's +2, one of which is basically a filter search through 3 cards. Obviously it has to be Steam Maidens, we'll get to that in a bit. But then you also have Entrana's End of Battle ability, which Soul Blast 1, you basically look at top 2, add 1 to hand, 1 to bind. So you can power up your cat by 1k. And you can also set up your Schlishma play as well. And you're basically adding stuff. So you're basically filtering through 5 in total there, while plussing 3. And that's very strong for 1 CB. Oh, and also that Soul Blast cost for Entrana's End of Battle skill. You're not even getting rid of Entrana, so it's recurable, which means you can use Entrana again next turn, which then makes Entrana into more of a damage sponge as well, which also applies more pressure to the opponent. So there's a lot of advantages, making Steam Maidens have basically possibly the best grade 2 game in this game right now. And we're not even done yet, because going back to what I said about the cat and adding Steam Maidens to hand, the cat can add perfect guards and heals. Why? Because the difference between Premium and V Premium is that you have a card called Steam Maiden Arlim. You add Steam Maiden Arlim as your perfect guard, and you can also use the heals, which is Steam Maiden Uluru, which they do play in V Premium. Only thing is that in V Premium they also play Lost Dog Gear 8, which is a grade 3 searcher, so you can add the one-off V heal if you want to your hand in Steam Maiden V Premium, which isn't really a play in Premium because people don't play Lost Dog Gear 8. They normally play, well, Arlim instead, the perfect guard, but then because you're not playing draw PGs as much now, you're playing more grade 1 PGs. And there's also Melum and TikTok as well taking up space. So there is more competing room, which means there's no room for Gear Dog Lost 8. It's a very tight deck, Steam Maiden Premium. But on top of that, because you've got the grade 3 being Steam Maiden Inglissa, basically you ride down to grade 2, and now suddenly you're not being punished for playing grade 0 heals because you're getting 5k more shield rather than, say, Nightmare Dolls who tend to play grade 3 heals. When they ride down, it hurts because they're basically not able to benefit from the grade 3 heals. They're not profiting from the downside, basically, of playing the grade 3 heals in the first place, which is that you're trading away 5k base shield so that you can have the effect activates when you've not ridden grade 3 yet in the game. And that's obviously a bit important because if you haven't ridden grade 3 yet, obviously you can make that 15k shield into something greater, but once you ride down, that 15k shield is a terrible card. And obviously there's other heals you'd rather have in hand at that point in the game, such as the 20k shield heal. So in a way, Steam Maiden's kind of counterbalances itself that way. And in a way, because they are playing with like a very good early game plus engine, they kind of compensate a bit for not playing grade 3 heals in other ways. And there's also Rollock as well, which is something that does get played too. Also compete for grade 1 space. So in a way, there's like a handful of different things that's basically incentivizing ride down plays. You're just winning in so many ways, and the force marker, it stays. And when you're using Ingrissa to ride down, you're doing that right after you've basically ridden Time Leaper Dragon to get an extra attack. So there is a bit of pressure going on there as well. and it just gets worse for the opponent. So generally the thing is that you just lose the grade 2 game if you're not playing Steam Maidens in a mirror match. So you can see the grade 2 game and you give them the first stride, and now the Colossus becomes effective and your hand gets crippled more. And once you go into your turn, you now have to get past what they've got. So they can build pretty decent defense in terms of just general good quality cards because of the filter being good. But to add more to it, they have access to Pandora Chimera, which to be fair is one of the weaker disruptive G guards in the game. It does still impact a few decks out there, but not as much as like other G guards out there could. But then the kind of bigger thing to look out for is, well, they have a cat combo that can give 10k to Vanguard, I'm pretty sure. But there's another thing, which is the Bearlock G guard, which is a G guard that doesn't require heals in your hand at all. So you can basically use your field, some of grade 3, and then you just bring out the G guard. People tend to play at least 2 of those. So you're getting extra G guards there. You always have access to them, and it's without sacrificing shield in your hand. So that +3 I mentioned, it's a bit more than just that +3, because those cards, if your opponent didn't just swing into them or waste resources going after those cards, those can be converted into basically G-Guard fodder. So there is definitely a lot of advantage in Steam Maidens, and it just made it harder for people to kind of bite back on their first stride, which they always had after their opponent. And then they get their turn 4 and they basically just win at that point. Like there's at that point the game just develops to a state where you just don't expect to still be in the game, especially given the scaling of force markers and the multi-attacks that go over there, and the Colossus as well being used again. I mean, it's just hard to survive that turn 4. So that's the thing. Steam Maidens have like they kind of mold themselves to have this sort of perfectly scripted game that kind of mitigates some of the variance aspects, and that is why the deck is considered to be really good, and why it started seeing more representation as well in events, like as people kind of caught onto it more. So it was definitely like a top choice once the restriction list happened the last time. I was aware of it. I was kind of surprised it wasn't seeing as much tournament play, but I think it did get there in the end, and I think at least we kind of know that now. That is a deck that people do need to look out for. But then to add to it, we've got Narukami. So we haven't even spoken about this yet. This one's actually controversial because there's goods and bads to it. Limit to 1, at least it's still playable, it's still legal. You can still technically play in any deck, but there is this idea that Sweep Command is going to end up being better now than the other variants. I don't know how bad it's going to be, to be honest, because earlier I did think, I mean, it was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction for me to feel like, oh, I think Sweep Command is now the best deck. But then I kind of just went off for a day. I just went out, like, after seeing the restriction list. I went and hanged out with some friends, played some games, and then I kind of just let things kind of soak in. And then as I was kind of coming home, then just kind of come to the conclusion, maybe it's not actually as bad. I mean, it's definitely not as bad as, say, Genesis last year, because they literally killed the clan, except for Regalia. But then, at least in Narukami, I don't think it's anywhere near as bad, because technically you're limited to 1, so you're still going to have 1 stride turn where you get to stun-verse people. And after you stun-verse someone, you've already got like a good lead up anyway, because you've got the best G-Guards, you've got Impede Dragon, you've got Bulwark Dragon. If you're re-riding, you're going to get another Axle marker as well. And I mean, you're sort of playing to late game anyway. It's just now you can't spam stun-verse, is basically what's changed. But other than that, like, yeah, Sweep Command doesn't really care about using stun-verse. It never did. It's always been about, oh, retire front row, use exterminate. So it's it might not be like, for all I know, maybe I've misjudged, and maybe Sweep Command is not actually going to be the best deck. It's very possible. I think I'd want to hear some of your opinions on this, though. Like, anyone who's got a lot of experience in Narukami, feel free to comment down below. Do you think it's exaggerated if I will say Sweep Command is now the best deck, or do you think there's a lot more nuance to it? Do you think that the other decks are still very solid, and or maybe could even be still better than Sweep Command in some ways? If you believe Vowing Saber, for example, is better than Sweep Command. Vowing, sorry, is it Vowing? Yeah, Vowing Saber reverse. I don't think anyone's playing Valiant Sword much anymore now. Yeah, let me know what you think there. But anyway, just to go over this quickly, we have a list of the tops as well, which Fuzzy Paradox put together for this season. Eradicate and Steam Maidens, top 2 decks in terms of representation. They're the ones that got hit, but you can see right beneath Reindeer. Over there, we've got quite a bit. It's not that far behind Steam Maidens. I feel like they should have been addressed alongside them. Like, I did think Reindeer was a deck that probably should be toned down a bit, because they do get some ever since How Truder, I think that deck has gone a bit bananas. Like, I've been trying it out and it's just so easy. Like, it's nuts compared to other decks that I play. I'm right now using it for playtesting so that I can plan my deck lists around it more, but honestly you just can't get them all. And in a best of one format, there's going to be a bit of RNG. So I can imagine myself just casually walking into Worlds, someone gets Pearl Sisters, and I'm on grade 2 and I just go home. Or something, right? That could happen. But yeah, it's just the kind of ways you can lose a competitive game. And I say competitive because when I use the word competitive in this context, I'm saying like a game where you're trying to use skill and, you know, think through things more. It's like that can all just be robbed away by the casual Pearl Sister calling, and I think that's something I'm not too fond of. But How Truder now exists, which has added more aggression to Bermuda, and obviously when you've got good hearts to ride into, like Lupina, sorry, it's not a ride, it's more like you just take the stride out and have the Vanguard stand, just so you don't accidentally add force marks if you're playing with it. But basically it's good because if you've got the hand size, as long as your opponent hasn't aggroed you to losing that hand, you can then do some of the most aggressive first strike plays. Like, it's very out there in terms of how aggressive it is. And because you're synergizing with Reindeer of all cards, Reindeer can extend into something even bigger. So you're using How Truder to basically, you've got your main field. How Truder swings after you've attacked with 2 rares. You then call your 2 rares back out again. And if they're Pearl Sisters, great, you've got 4 double crit attacks minimum. And then after that, you get Reindeer swing. So you might have to drop something there as well. After the Reindeer swing, then comes out some other card. Now, depending on what that other card is, could be okay, could be a disaster. Honestly, like, even something like Aneska has a downside. It may be less aggressive for now, but it also means they can survive the next turn more easily and then have a more definitive kill, which is, again, going back to the same difficulties you have against Steam Maidens in a way. But otherwise, you've got other cards like Laura, who can call a whole field, give 10Ks. Obviously, double crits become irrelevant by that point most of the time. But then you've also got Olivia and Lupina. So that's dangerous because you can resound Pearl Sisters. So now you've got 6 Pearl Sisters double crit stack, and Olivia's also double crit as well. So it's very deadly because you can do loads of attacks, and some of those could be double crits with big numbers as well. So they are they're definitely a deck I felt like should have been maybe toned down a bit. They've also got ride down plays, but it's a bit trickier than Steam Maidens. However, they do have now the new lyrical grade 1, the really expensive one, Yukia I think it was, and you can basically at the end of battle when you boost, you can soul blast a card, so you can more reliably now get that ride down than before. So that's something to look out for as well. And I think with other cards like Lupina existing and, well, Orange I guess as well, Reindeer isn't your only like grade 3 you have to ride into. So worst case scenario, you can always just ride into one of those and it's not too bad. If you feel like, you know, you may have shot yourself a bit there. NQ Tide can add PGs as well, so there is that too. So it's quite very strong. I feel like if you're gonna hit Steam and Eradicators, I feel like Reindeer should have maybe been touched them. You can maybe say that for Nightmare Dolls, but at least take that restriction off that they've got currently. I don't think there was much point in it. I mean, yeah, it does hurt them a bit, but it's just it just feels like it's not really what people were kind of like as fussed about in the first place. All it really did was make it so that when Palman bricks, it's got less ways of kind of meeting in the middle and playing back somewhere. That's really what the restriction did. And then after that, you just get to after those top 4, then you've got a bunch of severals, but there are 8 tops. So you've got Chaos Break got 8 tops, but Dylan and Thavas got the highest first places, which is pretty cool. So the thing is with Rising Nova is that Rising Nova has 2 different listings here. There's Rising Greedon and there's Rising Nova, which you can see at the very bottom there as well. When you combine it, it's 8 tops basically. So they got equal top 8s to Chaos Breaker. So they joined 5th basically. So that's just another kind of observation as well. But obviously there's a whole bunch of several. So come on, one top difference doesn't really mean anything. But it's definitely like worth noting that Rising is a thing, and it's definitely been one of the kind of big winners of P-Clan collection. I mean, it's made the clan a bit less diverse, but in that everyone's now playing Rising Nova. And obviously Galley is like the only strat you see anyone go into now. But the thing is that Galley is basically an OTK, and it makes it kind of very strong. So you have to be very careful in the matchup. So I think it's going to be one of the contenders. I didn't think Spikes would get too much representation because it's always kind of gone under the radar no matter how it's been doing over time. It's always kind of, to a lot of people, it's always felt like the deck that, oh, it can be good and it just won't top. But Grand Blue, it's been clinging there with some tops as well. I think they might benefit from this restriction. Like Steam Maidens losing Colossus is nice for them. Eradicators not being able to stun versus spam is also nice for them. It means they rely on Bell less now, so that's also a good thing as well. Less hand ripping to worry about. I think Grand Blue wins from this restriction, and it's not very likely that something here will gatekeep them out. I don't think. I feel like the gatekeepers were the ones that are already at the top. So Meg Conley, I can see there's just only 2 tops here. So, and I know who the players are actually as well. I actually just happen to know because one of them is Peter and one of them was my opponent in the finals for Rome. So yeah, that's less likely to gatekeep. But the thing is that's funny about Worlds actually is that every World Championship I go to, actually I don't think End of G, I'm not sure if there was Meg Conley in that one, but the last 2 that I went to, I've always seen Meg Conley representation. I went against it twice and lost to 2 Meg Conley players 2 years in a row. So it's definitely a deck that that does pop up. Now it's going to be very interesting to see how much Meg Conley there will be this year. So those are just some of the decks. Deleted Messiah, I think Steam Maidens being hit is definitely nice to them. I don't know about the Narukami hit being that impactful, honestly. I have no idea. Dark Irregulars, they could see more representation. Covetous Succubus came out like really late. It came out basically in the France, which is the final European BCS that weekend. And Covetous Succubus, that card, because it was in Europe, obviously is very unlikely someone would get hold of the promos in time. So there's a lack of representation for that, but there is this idea that, oh, now you can like win while you're on like 1 damage or something, right? Because generally like one of the counter plays against DI was to just damage Knight and then just go burst out on them, which there are some decks that can do that now. But it's definitely like one of those matchups where you just hate going against it. But even the person who plays Dark Irregulars is probably getting fed up of the deck being No Life King for the most part since that card came out. So it's basically just been like, with Full Facts, it's basically been like the rich get richer, where the already considered best deck has just gone even better, while the other variants not really being paid too much attention to. So it's been a really weird spot. I think the thing that's kind of put people off from playing this is the consistency aspect. So that would always be a reason why you won't see as much representation. But it is a really hard deck to play against as well. So there's very little you can do to control as much now as before. Well, even more so now than before. So that's just something to kind of note. It might still see representation, but it's always had like less than you'd expect. It's always been a contender for Worlds, and it's always been the deck to fear. But I think this time I'm just going to try not to kind of sing its praises too much, because the last two worlds I saw less than expected. So, especially the first of the three, the ones post V series, that world I was expecting to see more dark irregulars. Ended up seeing Ezel instead. It was an Ezel no life king format. The next year it was basically Ezel no life king and Katarina format. Now this time we'll see what it's going to be. First D worlds. So we've had like 2 worlds during the V series because of the pandemic. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, roughly my feeling on this. Dialina was a deck I was a bit more surprised to see a lot more of. Like, it's very high on the list. Unexpectedly. I don't think it's what people would have predicted. I think the top 4 is what people would have seen coming, but Dialina has kind of had more, it's got more weaknesses in, like, it's more of a turn 4 deck, generally. So if anything goes wrong before then, it's really bad for them. Like, their early game is vulnerable as well, so fighting for first strike isn't very easy, which can slow them down even more. And Link is a very strong guard restrict, but it's like literally the strongest kind of turn from before P-Clan Collection for sure. But then we started seeing like Elementaria Sanctitude in the D trial decks. We started seeing G-Guards that can minus crits, which I think the Gens one in particular is effective, but obviously, as you can see here, Regalia is like the only Gens deck being used, so and it's not like too highly played either. Like there's a whole bunch of other decks that are above them, so it's definitely that kind of counter deck is definitely less likely to disrupt them. I don't think the other cards are quite as effective. Like, I've only just realized Dark Irregulars' G-Guard only does max of -1 crit per unit, so it's basically choosing for every 10 in soul, so you then choose another target. You can't actually stack it onto one card. And Grand Blue, I'm not sure if it's the same. It might be the same with Grand Blue actually, but it's basically for every 10 drop you minus a crit as well, I think. But yeah, the Jensen one is kind of more reliable than some of the other ones, I think. And then you've also got Luard, which actually didn't make this list, but Luard is another deck that would counter Deep Police because they've got a Perfect Guard G-Guard. There's also Royal Paladins who also have it. Again, they're not on the list. Maybe that's part of the reason why Dimension Police might have performed better than expected, because the decks that had more of the counterplay probably weren't being used by the looks of it. It seems so, yeah. Gear Chronicles actually do have a G-Guard that can PG, so I guess that's one thing. And hey, they're in second. So, Kagura hasn't been listed either. Kagura also got Perfect Guard, G-Guard. So yeah, I think at large that might be a contributing factor, is that there's been a lack of Deep Police hard counters in this format, even though P-Clan Collection introduced so many cards that could counter linker combos. So it's given Dylan that kind of more of a window because of the environment, I guess. I mean, it's a weird state now because there are like some lethal weaknesses now. But if your opponents aren't playing those decks, I mean, it's why when I played Susano in Spain, how I won against Ripples is because, well, Ripples playing draw Perfect Guards. Okay, fine. Ichikishima, use Amaterasu a bunch of times. Cool. I P from 1 to 6. Good game. That's basically what I did. It's that kind of thing. Like, you can play these decks where they have like very horrible matchups and counters that ruin them. But if no one's really playing those cards, then you can get through. So I think that might have helped them as well. But yeah, I didn't expect it. I thought they were actually in a worse spot because of P-Clan Collection and because of Elementaria Sanctitude. So it's definitely a surprising one. I don't think this restriction will change anything. It actually could make it worse for Deep Police, if anything. Because if people decide to play something that's not even on this like spectrum here, if it means more people playing like any of these other decks I just mentioned, then that could be bad for them. So I don't think it benefits Deep Police. I mean, I could be wrong. I guess Gear Chronicle hits would, but Narukami maybe not as much. Again, feel free to correct me and educate me on this topic because I don't really play these, like most of these clans, but this is just this is sort of me trying to kind of piece it together. Anyway, I'm going to leave the video at that. I do feel like they should revise and look at unrestricting cards, because we've only seen bans, but we've not seen things go the other way around, which is something they've been doing in D and V format. In fact, ever since Premium became a thing, like V started, we've never seen any unrestricts at all, or revisions really. It's only just gone down one way, which is just more and more restrictions. So that's just something I kind of hope to see more of. Other than that, that's what I'm going to leave out. Let me know your opinions down below. What are your kind of thoughts on the restrictions? What kind of decks do you think will see more play? Or do you think it's actually going to be roughly similar format? Because maybe it just didn't do it as hard, and maybe the idea was just to try and close in the gap but still keep the format roughly the same. Let me know, and I will see you guys later.